The topic today is, I am proud of my weaknesses. Not that I am so crazy that I like to be weak and in trouble, but nevertheless there is a biblical reason for me to be proud of my weaknesses. And many years ago, after I completed my Master of Divinity course, I wanted to go for a doctoral study. About in year 2000, I asked one of my professors by the name of Dr. John Song if he could write a recommendation for me. I went to his office and he said, he always called me Brother Bhatta. Brother Bhatta, have a seat. And I said, sir, actually I just want to hand you over this recommendation form. And he said, no problem, just give me, I'll just fill it right away and you can take it with you. So I sat in his office and he filled my recommendation for the admission to the doctoral study. And he didn't even fold anything, he just gave me the paper and that's it. And out of curiosity, what he must have written about you, I just saw the other side where there was a list, and in that you had to list some of the strength. List some of his strengths, and in that he wrote, his weakness is his strength. And that had always stuck to my mind. Even today, I remember, I wonder what kind of weakness he must have seen in me. His weakness is his strength, he wrote. And that statement had become a comforting statement for me over the years. And I have been ridiculed and mocked at, abused, disrespected, misunderstood, accused. But in all those times, whenever I see myself being weak, I am proud of it because my weaknesses drive me to God. They make me depend on a power that is greater than mine. They force me to go to God in asking for His wisdom, His ability, and seeking Him more than anything else. And therefore, the reason I am proud of my weaknesses, the reason we ought to be proud of our weaknesses, not because we enjoy being self-pitied, or we enjoy being mocked and abused, or we enjoy being tossed aside or misunderstood or accused. No, we don't. We don't enjoy being addicted to certain problems. We don't enjoy being prisoner or captive to certain bad behaviors. We don't enjoy in our sicknesses or in our poverty. We don't enjoy in our discouragement and unhappiness. We don't enjoy in our divorce or broken relationship or spoiled children or some bad family member. We do not. There is nothing joyful in it. But yet we can rejoice in them because these are the things that drive us back to God. These are the things that drive us to a power that is greater than ours. These are the things that help you to achieve things that you would have never achieved in your own ability and strength. If you were not weak, if you did not see your weakness, if you didn't see the need for the power of God in your life, you would become just a mere human being living a normal human life with the best of your ability. But because we depend on a God who can do great and mighty things through a life that is surrendered to Him. So therefore, from Paul's letter, we can again with him say, I will boast in my weakness. I'll be proud in my weaknesses. Like last week, me and my wife, with all my goodwill, I had thought that the church members, OEM members here will be happy to pray for me and my wife to go to India. But that turned out to be the opposite, and they began to misunderstand me as if I was manipulating the church to get what I wanted. And then I realized, oh no, I had depended on the goodwill of the believers and the leaders here, thinking that I am their pastor, but it turns out the opposite way. That drove me and my wife to an island to pray for about a few days there. And then we know what God wanted us to do. And therefore, anytime you see weakness coming in your life, you've been offended, or you've been abused, or you've been ridiculed, misunderstood, accused, instead of retaliations and instead of defending yourself, you fall on your face before God, and He comes and rescues you. He comes and delivers you. He comes and gives His divine power so that you continue to achieve greater things than you could in your own strength. So let me read what Paul is talking about in his weaknesses. How is he proud of his weaknesses? Let us read 2 Corinthians chapter 11 from 16 to 23. I repeat, he said, let no one take me for a fool, but if you do, then tolerate me just as you would a fool, so that I may do a little boasting. In this self-confident boasting, I am not talking as the Lord would, but as a fool. Since many are boasting in the way the world does, I too will boast. You gladly put up with fools since you are so wise. In fact, you even put up with anyone who enslaves you or exploits you or takes advantage of you or puts on airs or slaps you in the face. To my shame, I admit that we were too weak for that. Whatever anyone else dares to boast about, I'm speaking as a fool, I also dare to boast about. As I had touched this part in the last 2 weeks also, look at in verse 20. In fact, you even put up with anyone who enslaves you or exploits you or takes advantage of you or puts on air. That means arrogant person. He is boastful. Nothing substance, but yet he pretends to be someone great. So if someone pretends you boast and slaps you on your face, that means they were exploiting the believers in Corinth. Some of these false apostles who were coming to Corinth, they were so proud and arrogant in their strength, in their ability, in their capacity. Because they were proud and boastful and arrogant, the Corinthians were respecting them. The Corinthians were submitting to them, so much so they were even slapping. Now, this is not just a rhetorical statement he is actually talking about a reality where these super apostles who were very proud and arrogant, they could go and slap a person. We have witnessed missionaries kicking the pastors in our nations. And that missionary was a very famous man. And I met him in Seoul some years ago. And he's a pastor of a very big church in Korea now. He was known to be a kicking missionary. And he was known to be a bribing missionary. He had even bribed the prime minister's wife with a very expensive Korean car. So these were the kind of people coming to Corinth, and the Corinthians were so happy to submit to this kind of people. And Paul said, it's my shame that I did not do this. I should be the one kicking you and knocking you out, but I am so ashamed I did not do it. Look at how he said. Verse 20, to my shame I admit that we were too weak for that. And then he said, I am going to boast a little bit now. I'm going to be proud in my physical abilities for a moment, Corinthians. And then he said, not because God would like me to do. He said, not as the Lord would. He knows that Jesus would never like to do it. Jesus never boasted, never demonstrated any kind of a pride. But Paul is stepping out of that line and said, you Corinthians, you are driving me crazy. And the way you are putting up with these kind of false apostles, these arrogant people, I'm going to be like them for a moment. You are making me to cross over the threshold of stupidity in boasting in our strength. You are putting me in danger of crossing the threshold of stupidity and foolishness, where I will be boasting about my physical or educational or racial superiority. That's what he's telling. In fact, he goes on to boast so much so that he touches that foolishness. He is about to touch the foolishness of boasting in our strength, in our ability, in our power. How does he do? He equals himself with the super apostle for a moment. He says, if you're proud, you're foolish. But you like the foolish people, so I want to be a foolish for a moment. Let me touch this foolishness. How did he do that? In verse 21. He said, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I'm out of my mind to talk like this. Now, he is going through this terrible, terrible emotional dilemma. What shall I do? What shall I write to these Corinthians? How can I make them understand their stupidity? And then he said, let me also be a stupid person by equaling myself with these super apostles who are boasting about their religious and their racial roots. He said, are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? And then he realizes what he's doing. He is going beyond out of his madness. In the previous chapter, he has said, these are the ministers of Satan. They are the ministers of the devil. But now he says, they are claiming to be the servant of Christ. He said, are they servant of Christ? Instead of saying, so am I, he said, I'm crazy. I am mad. What am I talking about? These people are proud, boastful, and they are not the servant of Christ. They are the servant of the devil. They are the servant of the money. They are servant of their stomach. They are servant of their pride and their lust and arrogance. So instead of saying, so am I, he said, I'm out of my mind to talk like that. You Corinthians, you nearly put me in that category. And then he switches off. Now he's turning to what he's really proud about. From verse 16 to 22, and the first part of 23, he was about to touch the area of stupidity and equaling himself with these super apostles. And then he changes his mind. He said, I'm crazy to talk like that. Then read again the second part of verse 23. He said, I am more. Now he's not telling, so am I. He said, I am more than these super apostles. I am greater than these super apostles. How? Then look at how did he say that? Let me continue to read. I have worked much harder, been in prison more frequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. The real reason I am greater than them, the real reason for my pride is not because of my Hebrew roots, not my nationalistic roots, not my educations, not my ability to do this and that. The real reason I should be boasting about Corinthians is that because I have worked harder than any of these super apostles. And then he said, I have been in prison frequently than anybody else. And then he said, I have been flogged many times in my body, most severely, and been exposed to death time and again. Many times I was about to die. I was given to death. I thought that is it. So these are the area Paul is boasting about. These are the areas that will describe his apostolic authority. These are the things that made him who he was. And therefore he said, I am going to boast, and I am proud of my hard works. I am proud of my imprisonment. I am proud of my floggings. And I am proud of my death. Not one time, many times, he says. So let me quickly run through some of the things he's proud of here. First of all, he was about to be foolish. He said he was as if stepping into the foolishness by comparing himself with these proud people, saying that I can do this, I can do that, they're there, I can do also these things. But then he changes. He says, I'm out of my mind. I don't want to even go there. He touches the foolishness and comes back to the reality and said, the reason I am more than them is because I worked very hard. Now, working hard is not a bad thing in itself. If you work hard, that means you're a good person, you're a decent human being. You are a very dedicated person, you're working very hard. But in this context of working hard is not something to be proud. For these super apostles, to work as a laborer was a disgraceful thing. You're a philosopher, you're a teacher, you're the person who's supposed to teach others. Now, I was told, even in Korean culture, poverty was something to be respected for the person who is the uppermost, who was the teacher, the young man. The teacher is supposed to teach. He's not supposed to work. He's not supposed to earn money. If the teacher begins to work and begin to earn money, in fact, the merchant is the lowest class, if I'm right. The merchant, the one who makes money, the lowest of all. So even in the Greek mentality, in Roman society, the teacher should not work. The teacher should not touch the manual laborers. And I come from a Hindu background, and in my priestly class, I am not supposed to touch an oxen. Not just an oxen, but a plow. I should not touch a plow, because I come from a priestly class. I could not comprehend what would happen. If I touched the plow, I would be defiled, so I had to go through a religious ceremony. That's the spirit here. The false apostles were using the heathen mentality, the heathen philosophy, to exalt themselves as great teachers, great apostles, great preachers, and therefore they were enjoying the Corinthians' money. They were utilizing the system of patronage, where the rich man will welcome this preacher to this house, and he will be very proud. Okay, I invited the senior pastor to my house. Now in Korea also, if a senior pastor from Seoul comes to Daejeon, and if you get to invite him to your house, or he said, yes, I will come, and you'll be very proud. Yeah, senior pastor came to my house. That's the spirit these false apostles were using. And in that context, for Paul, he began Corinthian life by making tents as a laborer, lowest class of job. So he said, I worked very hard. So much so, look at verse 27, 26 and 27. How did he work hard? I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from the rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. Verse 27. I have labored and toiled. This is a physical labor with real hand on the soil. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. He had to work throughout the night to support himself, to support his fellow workers. And I have known hunger and thirst, and I have often gone without food. Here is a great preacher, a greatest apostles of his time. And he's telling, he worked so hard that he couldn't even sleep. And even then, he could not meet his need. He had to go through hunger and thirst enough, and without food and without sleeping. So if I have to be proud, Corinthians, these are the area where I'm proud, because when I was hungry, I trusted God. When I thirsty, God met my need. When I needed money, God provided me. When I was in desperation, there was a deliverance coming from the hand of God. Because later in next chapter he's going to say, because when I am weak, then I am strong. In my weaknesses I see the power of God working. And that's why I am very proud of my weaknesses. Whereas the super apostles were very proud of their ability to deceive the people with their money. You know, sometimes I've been in the ministry, and there are some believers in every church, when they see pastor's life becoming good and comfortable, they are not happy. But if they see pastor suffering, poor, his wife wearing all old clothes, his children couldn't go to a good school, always pastor's car is old and broken, and they feel very happy about it. The moment pastor's wife comes to church with a new dress, everybody begins to look at her. How did she get it? When I began the ministry, there was a rich lady in our church, a handful of believers, and my son was about almost 2 years old. And this sister was always watching over our life, and out of something she brought her son. Her son was a bit older, but maybe one of the older piece of cloth, a kind of old shirt for a boy. That was my first experience of receiving a cloth for my son. But I made a promise before then that, God, I will never wear others' clothes. Not me, not my wife, not my son. And my wife was wearing 5 years her same university clothes. And my son was wearing just whatever we could afford. And that day, me and my wife said, no, we will believe in a God who will meet our need in a miraculous way from a godly people. But this person was not a godly person. She had created all kind of troubles, and she had made all kind of problems, and finally in a very sarcastic way, oh pastor, your son needs some clothes, why don't you take this? And we handed it over to someone else. And God had been merciful, and throughout our life, and our son and my wife, and we have been quite decently clothed, I guess. But even then we have experienced, every time there is a new piece of cloth on my wife's body or son, someone will come along with a great kind of comment. How did you buy? Where did you buy it? How could you afford it? Somehow, pastor's wife or children of pastor's life must be miserable. And then they are very happy. I think Corinthians had similar spirit. Why? Because when Paul first came there, he began to work. And the church began to grow. And as he was working, some brother from Macedonia came. And they brought some financial gift for him. And he said then after that he didn't have to work, because Timothy, Titus and some other brothers brought money from Macedonia, and he could completely devote his time to teaching and preaching the gospel. And the Corinthians began to be jealous about it. And they stopped. He's got money from outside, why should we support him? But knowing their attitude, when the church began to grow, now they were willing to pay again. First time, they must have said, oh, he's got money, why should we bother about it? But later when the church began to grow, they wanted to support, and Paul said, no, keep your money with yourself. I will not receive a penny from you, because your attitude is wrong. Your thinking is wrong. And therefore, you cannot take away my pride that I'm serving you without you contributing zero amount of help to me. Yesterday I met an Indian pastor who is beginning his ministry in Daejeon with the Korean church. He's about 3 months already here in Korea, and the church said to him a few days ago, you are benefiting 90% from our church, and our church is only benefiting 10% from you. And Now, if that is the attitude of the church, then how in the world can a person minister there? And this pastor's family is going through a nightmare. What Paul is talking about working so hard is that instead of receiving money from you, Corinthians, just the way the false prophets are, apostles are doing, I am so proud because I worked so hard myself. And I have seen how God met my need many, many times over. How God spoke to the Philippians, how God spoke to the Colossians, how God spoke to the Thessalonians, how God spoke to this person and that person. When I was in need, they came all the way from there to meet my need. But whereas you, Corinthians, you keep accusing me as if I am here for your money, and therefore I will not take it from you. I worked so hard. I went without food. I went without sleep, but I did not receive money from you. Because my trust was in Christ and Christ alone. So I'm not ashamed of admitting that I was hungry, I was thirsty, I couldn't have clothes. He said I was naked many times and cold. Those are the area where he becomes very proud about it. Not because it's a good thing to be naked. It's not good to be hungry. But because when you are in that kind of a need, you experience divine provision. You experience divine hand of God meeting your need. Secondly, he said, I have been in prison more than anybody else. Frequently in prison. Now he's writing before going to Rome finally, but we see him in Roman prison again. But before that itself, here we see him going to prison many, many times. Now, if a member of your family is arrested and handcuffed, how do you feel? If your brother or your sister or your father or mother or anyone, your children, if they are handcuffed and you see in the television, how do you feel? Proud about it? Wow, great, my son is arrested. Praise God. It's a disgrace. Maybe you're an innocent person in handcuffs, but people who see you, they see you as a criminal. It's a disgrace, a shame. There is nothing to be proud of going to prison. But here Paul says, I will boast in my imprisonment, because when I was in prison, oh, God worked a miraculous work. We can only think about Philippian prison at this time. When Paul was in Philippi, he was arrested and put in prison with Silas. While in prison, God worked a marvelous work. And there he saw the divine hand of God come. And one of the powerful church, one of the most amazing church in New Testament, the church at Philippi, began there. Had he not been in prison, this would not have happened. So therefore he said, I will boast in my weakness, such as hunger and thirst and hard work. And I will boast in my arrest, in my imprisonment. Many times, every city he goes, he is arrested, he is put in prison. His reputation is tarnished. He is leveled as a criminal or a troublemaker. When people look at him, they see him as a criminal. But in that state, God begins to work. And he says, I am not ashamed of being in prison. In fact, maybe some of them were ashamed of him being in prison. Let's see how he says to one of his closest friend, disciple Timothy. In 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 8, he said like this, so, do not be ashamed to testify about our Lord, or ashamed of me, his prisoner. Don't be ashamed of me. Timothy, I am in prison. There are some who are ashamed to associate with me, but you don't ashamed. But join with me in suffering for the gospel by the power of God. In verse 11 it says, and of this gospel I was appointed a herald, an apostle, and a teacher. That is why I am suffering as I am. Yet I am not ashamed, because I know whom I have believed, and I am convinced that he is able to guard what I have entrusted to him for that day. I am not ashamed of my chains. I am not ashamed of my imprisonment. I am not ashamed of my disgrace, because I am not ashamed of the gospel, and therefore God is able to keep that which I have submitted to Him. In His disgrace, God exalted Him. Through His imprisonment in Philippi, church became. Through His imprisonment in Rome, the gospel went into the palace. Even the emperors and their household came to know Christ. Because He was in chain, He could stand before King Agrippa and Felix the governor and many other high and exalted personality. Because of the chain, He was able to take the gospel to the highest power of the world at that time. And therefore, why did it happen? Because I was willing to go wherever it needed to live for Him and for the gospel. So I am not ashamed of prison, but I am proud of it, because in that I see the power of God working. Thirdly, he said, I was physically abused more than anybody else. Physical torture. First he said, I worked so hard to support myself, and I'm proud of it. So I've been in prison many, many times, and I'm proud of it. And now he said, I was physically abused, tortured to the point of death many times. How did he say? Let's read verse 24. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. That means, how is 5 times 40 lashes minus 1? You know the calculations. So 39 times they will slap. It's a painful method of tormenting. They will beat you slowly and steadily until the strength just vanishes out of your body. The whips will tear every part of your skin. 5 times he was flogged. 39 times. They will tie you to the pole and they will turn you around every side so that no skin is left untouched in your body. If you have seen the movie 12 Years a Slave, you would see some of the similarities there. 12 Years a Slave is a very powerful graphic representation of slavery in America. And Paul says, I was flogged 5 times. And with all possibility, if you could meet Paul, you will never find his skin untouched. Tattered and broken and bruised. In fact, his bones, see how? Let's see, 25. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Broken bones and skulls may be broken. Continue. Once I was pelted with stone. Stoned to death, actually. They thought he was dead. 3 times I was shipwrecked in the ocean. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. And then he said, oh, danger here, danger there, danger there. What he is telling is, I am proud because I suffered in my body tremendously. Now, a teacher, a philosopher is respected. No one is allowed to touch the teacher. If someone attacks your teacher, you will go and attack that person. You will defend your teacher like anything. But here is this apostle of Christ saying, look at my body. He said, I bear the marks of the cross in my body. My body is bruised and broken. And that I'm proud of it. Brothers and sisters, have you suffered for Christ's sake? Have you suffered for godly life? Or are you suffering because you want your way? Are you suffering, going through peacelessness, lonely, discouraged, because you want something for yourself? Or are you suffering because you want to live for God? You want to live for the gospel of Jesus Christ? The super apostles were trying to live for themselves, and they were boastful and proud. And that is foolishness, he says. And at the end of the day, they will lose everything. But here is this man who has suffered so much, and he said, therefore I will boast in my weaknesses. Fourthly, he not only suffered in his body, he is also suffering emotionally and spiritually. Look at what he says in the last remaining verses. He said, who is weak? And verse 28, besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. Who is weak and I do not feel weak? Who is led into sin? Am I not inwardly burned? If I must boast, I will boast of these, the things that show my weaknesses. The God and the Father of our Lord Jesus, who is to be praised forever, knows that I am not lying. In Damascus, the governor under King Aretas had the city of Damascus guarded in order to arrest me. But I was lowered in a basket from a window in the wall and slipped through his hand. So he was emotionally and spiritually under stress. He was worried about the church like Corinth. He was worried about many other churches, many other Christians. He said, I am suffering even in my spiritually. I am proud because I have this concern for you. And then he said, who is not weak? Am I not weak? And not only that, he said, who is led into sin? Am I not burning inwardly? That means Paul also faces the same temptation to commit sin. He is burning inwardly, here not necessarily with the lust for sexual immorality, but here he is burning with anger, revenge. He is burning with the desire to attack and defend. He is angry, so to say. His righteous indignation is within himself. He says, I am burning inside. I am tempted to commit sin. And nearly he almost had committed a sin of pride by leveling himself with these false apostles. Whereas in Philippians he said, I consider them garbage. But here he was kind of boasting about his religion, his nationality, his roots. So he almost had committed a sin of pride here. And then he said, I'm out of my mind. I am not going to talk about that. And then he turns towards his own weaknesses. And he said, these are the things I am proud of. Because they drive me to my Savior. They give me the glimpse of heaven. They give me the ability to do what I cannot do in my own strength. So I will be proud of my weaknesses. Now the last thing is interesting. The last passage in verse 13. In Damascus, it looks like disconnected piece here. In Damascus, the governor under King Aretas had the city of Damascus guarded in order to arrest me, but I was lowered in a basket from a window in the wall and slipped through his hand. He is proud about his weaknesses, and all of a sudden, he goes to Damascus. It appears no connection, but I think he is deliberately bringing this incident at the end of his speech. He said, I am proud of this. Why am I proud? Because in my weakness, I see God delivering me. Now, this is Paul's first experience of deliverance after he became a believer. You remember, he went from Jerusalem to Damascus to arrest the Christians and bring them to Jerusalem and possibly kill them. On the way to Damascus, Jesus appears to him and his life is transformed. And he goes into Damascus and stays for sometimes some say 3 years he stayed in Damascus and Arabia. Wherever he was, the city wanted to kill him. And a man who wanted to ride into Damascus and arrest many Christians is now being lowered from a wall on a basket. A very humiliating thing for a powerful man. Yet he said, God rescued me in this way that I was lowered in a basket out of his hand that wanted to kill me. And here again, Paul kind of suddenly puts a break. Just like in verse 23, he put a break. He was about to say, I'm a Jew, I'm an Israelite, and suddenly he said, oh, I'm out of my mind to say like that. He puts a break into pride. Now, he was about to touch into the area of how he experienced the deliverance from the hand of God. And he touches his first experience as a believer out of Damascus, and he stops there. Because then again it would be a pride. See, I was shipwrecked, God did this, and I was there and God did this, and I was in Philippine jail, God did this. That would again come kind of a spiritual pride. But he just wants to give us the glimpse of how God delivers you and me when we trust Him in our weaknesses. So the reason we can be proud in our weakness is because God works. If you have read Robinson Crusoe, there is an interesting story in this work. After shipwreck, Crusoe finds himself in an island. The story is told beautifully. 9 months passed, and one day Crusoe becomes terribly sick. And he is about to die with a high fever. And until in this, the writer portrays Crusoe as a non-Christian, though born in Christian family, but never had any regard to God or Bible or anything. So now he's all alone in this island for a 9 month and catches this deadly fever, and he's now sure to die. In his mind, he remembered that the Brazilians, they used to smoke or eat tobacco in times like that. So he remembered he had saved a bundle or a bunch of tobacco somewhere in one of the chests as well. He was shipwrecked. He goes and looks for the tobacco, and when he opened one of the chests, in that tobacco box he found the Bible. And he casually opened the Bible, and his eye falls on Psalm 50, verse 15, where it says, "Call unto me in the day of thy trouble, and I will deliver thee, and thou wilt glorify me." And Crusoe writes in this imaginary world that for the first time in his life, he did what he never did before, and he prayed. He said, "God, I'm going to die. Deliver me from this sickness." And to his amazement, the fever leaves him and he goes on living. After some times in the island alone, Crusoe again comes under the tremendous power of guilt. He began to evaluate his life. His past began to come. Sin began to haunt him. And he was so depressed. And the same verse comes back to him. "Call unto me in the day of thy trouble, and I will deliver thee, and thou wilt glorify me." He calls upon God. And Crusoe says, a glory of heaven fills his heart. The cross becomes so real, and his sins vanish. And never again Crusoe becomes discouraged about his sinful life. He said, "I received a divine comfort, a divine healing." First, physical healing. Now, spiritual healing. 11 years passed in that island. Crusoe is all by himself. By now he had made a den for himself, a fortress, where he would defend against these savages and cannibals. Surrounding islands were filled with cannibals. And one day, while he was walking towards his boat, he saw human footprints. And that terrified him, because they were the footprints of savages and the cannibals, and they are there to kill him. So he runs as fast as he could from the beach to the mountain cave where he was hiding. And in that cave, he knew his end has come, because once the savages come to the island, they will kill him. And the same verse comes to him and said, "Call unto me in the day of thy trouble, and I will deliver thee, and thou wilt glorify me." Crusoe begins to call again. And he said in that cave, he began to call in God in such a way, he fell asleep. And by the time he woke up, there was no fear. No fear at all of a death. And to his amazement, as he walks out of that place, and Crusoe's friend called Friday. He meets a savage. His name was Friday. Crusoe gives him name Friday because that was a Friday he met him. And he becomes his closest friend and defender. And through him, the story continues. So what I'm trying to say to you is this. In your weaknesses, like Crusoe, as an imaginary character though he may be, but the reality is very much similar to that. When you're desperate, you're dying with the fever, and suddenly you turn to the Word of God. You turn to God, and God comes to rescue you. Then suddenly you come to a place of guilt and ashamed about your past or present, and you fall on your face and say, God, help me out of my guilt. And the cross of Christ becomes so real to you. And you're delivered from the guilt, and the bondage and forgiveness becomes yours. And then any kind of a natural or a supernatural terror that attack you, or enmity, or sickness, or tragedy, or failures in life, like Crusoe, you may be running away from the problems. Even at that time, you call upon God, and the divine grace will give you the ability to overcome fear. And the thing that you're running away can become your best friend. Like the savage Friday became Crusoe's best friend. And that is why, my friend, we need to be very grateful to God if you have some weaknesses in your life. Don't fight against the weaknesses. Surrender your weakness to God. Take your weakness with you and go to God. But be very watchful of being boasting about your ability. Make sure that you don't depend on your own personal ability and strength. Because the day you do, you will begin to realize that's a foolishness. Shall we close our eyes as we go into the communion service? Sometimes your weakness may be so overwhelming that call on God like Crusoe called, like Paul called. Call on Him, and He will deliver you. He will deliver you in such a way you will glorify Him. Maybe it's a physical weakness, call on Him. Maybe spiritual weakness or emotional weakness, call on Him. He will deliver you, my friend. And you will glorify Him when you experience the deliverance. If it is a natural problem or some social or family situations where you feel insecure or in danger, call on Him. He will deliver you. And when He delivers you, you will glorify Him.